Well, I've heard lots of laughter going on. And you all could talk about stories to your grandchildren the rest of the evening. Yes, they do say the darndest things. Well, why do stories matter so much? You know, you all just shared things that your grandchildren have said or done. You've just told each other stories. You've just found out more about each other and about your grandchildren. You know, stories get shared over and over and over again. Well, just think about the movies that we watch. You'll watch a movie that has a good storyline. You'll watch it over and over again. We always, at Christmas time, we have to watch A Wonderful Life. Yes, I'm partial to Jimmy Stewart, but it's just because it's a good story. Stories don't get told about everyday occurrences. They don't get told about the chores that you do. Stories get told about something special that happens, something that stands out. My dad would always tell a story when we were talking about being honest or integrity. It always seemed that he pulled the story out of his early teenage years. He worked at a drugstore. And at that time, drugstores had these big bins of nuts and candy and beans, and you bought things by the pound. And there was a big scoop in there. Well, his job was to make sure those bins were full. But his employer always said, "Jim, when you're filling the bins, I want to hear you whistling." Yeah, if you're whistling, you can't be sneaking candy or nuts. Kind of hard to whistle when that's happening. Well, my family is full of stories just like yours. I mean, there are stories of someone falling in a sinkhole, of jumping in the back of a 55 candy apple red pickup truck and going to Zesto's soft serve ice cream after the yard work was done. There are stories of karate chopping warm butter and chicken soup on the ceiling. All kinds of stuff. Burning bushes. It just goes on and on. But each one of those is part of who I am, even if it didn't happen to me. You know, our stories, right now, it seems like everybody is really interested in that. We see websites like Ancestry.com and FamilyHistory.org, and even that show that says, "Who do they think they are?" Those are so popular because people want to hear stories. They want to be part of a good story. You know, the Bible, the last book of the Old Testament, Malachi, says, remember back to the stories of Moses. Remember back. And you move to the New Testament, it's constantly saying, remember the stories of the Old Testament, those people of faith. I was in children's ministry for 30 years. And the reason I was in children's ministry is because I wanted kids to remember the stories of faith that the Word of God has. You're here tonight because you want to know how you can make it possible for your grandchildren to remember your story of faith. That when they get in a place where they're making a decision or there's a challenge in front of them, that they remember how you were faithful, how God was faithful to you. And they make their decision partially based on knowing your story. So why do stories matter so much? Well, for one reason, they draw out emotions. You hear a story, and all of a sudden your heart's breaking. Eyes are all welled up. You're connecting with it. Stories bring out emotions of just laughter, and you just have a good hee-haw out of it. You go, how could they actually do that? That is so funny. We heard some of those stories. I overheard some of those just a few minutes ago. We hear stories that connect with emotions when you get frustrated just because you hear that story. Or all of a sudden you find yourself really envious. Oh, I wish I was in that position. All these emotions just come to the surface when we hear stories. Why do stories matter so much? Because we relate to them. Stories are full of those moments when you go, I've done that too. Or, oh, I'm glad somebody else was thinking that. Or you go, really? You've been through that? Because that's where I am right now. Stories help us relate. Why do stories matter so much? Because they help us answer questions. Is that why we live here? How did that make you feel? Well, why did that happen? When did we move here? When did they come here? When did you decide to do that? All these questions. And when you tell stories, all of a sudden you're, oh, that's the answer to that. Our son had an 8th grade project of looking at his family history. I kind of went overboard as a mom. It ended up being 108 pages typed. I got called in for a personal one-on-one with the teacher. Said, I think you're driving your son a little too hard. But through that, we heard all of these stories. I made him tape record. And yeah, we remember tape recording, right? Okay. I made him tape record his grandmothers telling stories. I made him ask them questions and sit at their feet. And he was like, oh my goodness, I know so much now about my family and who I am. He had so many questions answered. Why do stories matter so much? Well, they matter because they explain why a person is who he is. It all just kind of goes together when you get this story and this story and this. Oh, that's why you're the way you are. Why do stories matter? I'll tell you why they matter, because kids love them. They love stories. My grandkids are always going, Grandma, please tell us another story. Sure, I'll tell you another story. I love to. And in that, we just need to embrace their love of stories and step right into that and say, oh, I've got a story for you. It's a story of how God walked with me through this situation. You know, our grandchildren want to hear those stories, but sometimes we feel like maybe we're imposing or we're pushing it on them. Please get past that, because you're not. Sometimes we think maybe we're overstepping our bounds if we go there and we tell them the story. That's all about who they are. That's part of who they are, by learning about who you are. And you know, the Bible tells us, has these grandparents and grandchildren. They're not really blood relation, but they have those positions. Barnabas and Mark and Moses and Joshua, Elizabeth and Mary. And those grandparents in those positions were passing things down. But then we have people like Elisha, who was the grandchild, and he goes to Elijah. Elijah's not forcing it down on him. Elisha says, Elijah, I want a double portion. Give me more. I want what you've got with the Lord, but I want twice as much. He's begging for the stories. And Ruth goes to Naomi. She's begging for what Naomi has. And she says, I will go where you go. I will live where you live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. That is not Naomi saying, listen here, you're going to sit here and listen to my story. That is Ruth asking for Naomi to tell her more of her story. Stories matter. Your story matters to your grandkids. One of the things I like to do is just imagine who I was at the age my grandchild is right now. My grandkids are 5 years old. I remember skating up concrete steps and busting my front tooth out when I was 5 years old, and so I warned them about that. But right now, I want you to choose just one of your grandchildren, any of them, okay? They might be 5, they might be 18, they might be 27. I don't know how old your grandchildren are. Choose one and then place yourself. Go back and go, okay, at that age I was, what were you doing then? A story from about that age. And I want you to turn to the people in your group, and I want you to share a story about yourself at the age of one of your grandchildren. Okay? Commence.